Okay. Uh, how did you first get involved in the JFK assassination research?
Okay, well, a long time ago, I wasn't really all that interested in the case, and I picked up a Playboy interview that Jim Garrison did in 1967. Although this is much later in the into the 70s where I picked it up, and I read it with interest because I thought that he made a pretty good case. And so what happened was, from there I went to the Warren Report, and from there I went into some other books, and I became convinced over the years that there was a conspiracy and Garrison was onto something. And then I went to when I went to college, that was going to be my big screenplay. It was going to be on the Garrison case, the Kennedy assassination, and I worked on that. And what happened was, eventually, over a period of time, Oliver Stone took the book, and so then I decided to write my book on it instead of making a film on it.
What do you feel is your most important contribution to bringing the case into a little clearer focus for of history's sake for America?
Well, I think the one of the best things I did, and I think I've heard a lot of people ask me this and tell me this. They said they were very glad that somebody actually wrote about Garrison in an objective to a favorable light, and therefore made him well, actually a lot more respectable because of the success of the movie, and plus the people who read my book, and because he had fallen into kind of a terrible kind of disrepute even in the critical community of the Kennedy assassination researchers. And so I think that's one of the things I think that I accomplished with the book.
And why do you think it's such an important issue after 3 decades have passed now?
Well, I think it's important because I think to say that it's a dead issue or that it's too old, I think is the wrong way to look at it, because there's new discoveries being made all the time about who Jack Kennedy was and what his administration stood for. And I think to say that it doesn't matter anymore in light of what happened with the debacle in Vietnam and what's happened to this country after the 1960s, I think is kind of irresponsible, because I don't think anybody can make the argument that if Jack Kennedy would have lived, things would have been a lot different all the way up until today. And I think that touches on the present as well as the past.
Do you think that in this late in the game, there's any hope of resolving the case? Do you think there should be a special prosecutor?
Yes,
Or
yes,
do you think there should be a new investigation?
to the first question, yeah, I think there is a lot of hope of solving the case. And yeah, to the second question, I think that there should be some kind of investigation to reopen the Kennedy case. I think that once we get a lot of this new documentation that's going to come out through the Free the Files movement, I think there'll be enough evidence, and there already is a lot of evidence, for a special prosecutor to be appointed and to begin interrogating witnesses who are still around, and not all of them are dead. There's a lot of people still around.
Okay, this is kind of a strange question. Some researchers love it and some hate it. Some refuse to answer it and some thrive on it. Of all the investigators, public and private, over the years, who do you think are the ones, other than Garrison? I know Garrison would obviously be in there. That you feel have made the most important contributions to the case. Sort of a top 10 list, but it doesn't have to be 10 names.
Okay.
Who do you respect?
Well, some of the better researchers from the earlier generations, I would say, are Josiah Thompson, the author of 6 Seconds in Dallas, Sylvia Marr, who wrote Accessories After the Fact, Vincent Salandria, who wrote a couple of articles in some offbeat magazines, and going further to the more present time, I would say Henry Hurt, Paris Flamand, Anthony Summers, John Newman, more of a policy question. And I think in the public domain, Gayton Fonzie, who worked for the House Select Committee, did a very nice job in a couple of areas. I think Patricia Orr, who wrote for the House Select Committee, and Eddie Lopez, who did the Mexico City report for the House Select Committee.
That kind of leads into my next question, I think. Now that the files, after the JFK movie and the outcry for opening the files, we see this act has been passed and they're beginning to trickle out. I bet that you'd like to see the Lopez report, but what sort of files that are there that you know are there would you like to see in the files hidden that are secret?
Oh, okay. Well, there's also some very interesting audio tapes that the House Select Committee did with some very crucial witnesses. Okay, and I think from what I understand and from people who have been around them, there's some very, very interesting testimony on some of those on some of those tapes, which might be one of the reasons why some people don't want them released. I think it will show that the House Select Committee had a lot more evidence than they ever let on to. And I also think that some of the documentation in the in the paper files about Oswald himself, okay, may begin to shed some light about his specific role as an intelligence operative. Okay, I think those are the most important things that are going to be there.
Now, I know that you had access to the Garrison, the Shaw trial transcripts, and that's not easy to get, and uh, and some of the other information that Garrison had put together. I guess it's at AARC.
Some of it is.
But what was your relationship with Garrison before he died, and did he help you understanding the things that he went through, uh, and the troubles he had, and the disinformation, and the CIA infiltration, and all these sort of things? What sort of interaction did you have with him?
Okay, this is one of the more tragic things about my experience with the book, is that when I originally started, I called Garrison up a few times, and I would leave messages at his work number because I didn't have his home phone, and he didn't towards that time, he wasn't taking anybody's calls, just anybody's calls, because he'd been burned so many times by the media before, and so he actually called around to see who I was, to check me out. Okay, that I wasn't going to do another hatchet job on him. All right, and so then when he found out who I was and he was going to call me back, is when he was first hospitalized. And so what happened was, since he was on, he once he got sick, he was immediately bedridden, and he was only conscious 2 or 3 hours a day. I never actually got to directly talk to him, and so I had to talk to the people around him in the investigation, like Lou Ivon and Jim Alcock and some other people down in New Orleans. And so one of my biggest regrets is I never ever interviewed him face to face, and I had to collect other interviews that he had done up to that time.
Okay. Some of the files that have already come out are very interesting, and I'm sure when more of them come out, it'll throw light on this. But for instance, the file on that seems to be manipulating information, and the thing about propaganda assets and people in the media countering this conspiracy stuff. Do you think that it's a judgment call and it's difficult to speculate, but do you think that the documents, the millions of documents that may come out, hopefully not redacted too much, will shed light on the possibility of obstruction of justice or destruction of evidence, or who may have helped to, you'll never find the assassins probably, but who may have helped to do the cover-up?
Yeah, I think you can establish a paper trail there, for the very fact that a lot of these documents are going to be that once were heavily redacted will not be as redacted as before. And I think you're also going to see in interactions with agencies, for example, the Warren Commission with the FBI, the Warren Commission with the CIA, the interference of the CIA with the Garrison investigation, the interaction between the CIA and the House Select Committee. I think you're going to see a very definite pattern of non-disclosure, of withdrawal of certain parts of documents, and of simply we're not going to give it to you. Okay, that kind of that kind of attitude. And I really hope that the review board is very strong on what they will allow to be deleted and what they won't. And I hope we don't get documents like many of the documents that I've seen, especially on people like Clay Shaw, that are like 50% censored, so you don't even understand the train of thought that's going through the document.
When I read one of these books, it takes me forever because I'm always going back and looking at the footnotes because I wonder about the sources, and I thought that your book was very well sourced. Obviously, because this is such a hazy case, and you can interpret things in a lot of ways. People could argue certain points in other ways, but have you had difficulty, even though it looks like a scholarly work to me, getting the mainstream press to review your book? Have you had trouble getting reviewed?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a common problem in this community. It's because the mainstream press does not like to talk about this subject. Therefore, unless you have very good connections through your publisher, you usually don't get reviewed. And so what happens is you end up trying to work up a network through radio talk shows, through small town newspapers, through alternative media, kind of things, and that's successful sometimes, and sometimes it's not. But those are the people who this community relies on, talk radio and things like that, and they're very necessary to our success.
Now, a lot of the criticism of Garrison, and I tend to think that it's not true, or if it's true, it's a very subtle. It's not a clear-cut case. People tend to accuse him of ignoring the mob or being friends with the mob, and the most persuasive evidence of that I've heard, and that really doesn't convince me one way or the other, was a researcher, Jones Harris, and he said that one time during the Garrison investigation, he met with Garrison, and Jim said Harris had brought up Marcello, and that Marcello, because of Ferry and the connection, why don't we look at him? Or I don't know exactly what the context was, but apparently Garrison said, well, oh, I know Carlos. Let's have lunch with him, or something to that effect. Did you hear about that story? And have you ever talked to Jones Harris, or have you debunked any of these mob things?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've run across all the ones that everybody else has run across. Okay, and
He was an old first generation.
yeah, I've never met Jones Harris, and I've never heard that story before. Okay, but I have run across some other ones in the media, and also by some private researchers, and I've tried to go into as many as I possibly can, and I think that you can make a pretty good argument that the ones in the media are very well orchestrated, by from the FBI and the CIA, and I won't go into all those details. Some of them are in the book, okay. But I think you can make that argument. As far as Bill Turner, who is a very good researcher and writer on the Garrison case, once told me that I think he was in the athletic club in New Orleans, and Marcello's son came in, okay, and Garrison seemed to know him because he talked to Jim. And I found out later that what happened in that was that when Garrison was catching all this heat from Life magazine about the mob, they actually called because Garrison was really stung by this, and he called a grand jury hearing, okay, into his own office to see if they're to check out the organized crime and any connections. And so he ended up calling members of the Marcello family, okay, to testify at that hearing, and that's how he knew who these people were.
That seems to be a rather important fact that it's not commonly known.
No, in fact, I just learned about it because I just got some new files, about the Garrison case. Okay, and Garrison was actually, it's the closest I ever saw. He was actually thinking of suing Life magazine for libel. Okay, for the article that they ran, and he actually wrote a threatening letter to Dick Billings. He actually wrote an attorney in New York to explore it, and he ended up not doing it because he could not. It was too much for him to rob somebody else of their First Amendment freedom, since his job was supposed to be to uphold First Amendment freedoms. Okay, and so that's why he did not go through with the lawsuit.
Now, I know that sometimes putting out one of these books can be a traumatic experience, and you tend to want to end it and not necessarily carry on other projects. But do you have a sequel or another book or any similar sort of a thing?
I do have something. Yeah, I do have something. If you can believe it, it must be a masochist. But I do have something planned on the relationship of the Kennedy assassination to the Watergate scandal. And from all the bad times I've had on this, I think I'll be lucky to come out alive on that one.
You must be getting thick skin.
Yeah, we're pretty stupid.
Now, this is the final question, and this sometimes throws the researchers for a loop, but they seem to like it a lot. Sometimes the media can be a little bit, not necessarily ignorant, but or maybe lazy, or they're just confused by this wilderness of mirrors. And a lot of times the researchers complain that in interviews they tend not to ask very informed questions. Mm-hmm. So I thought that I would turn this around, and if you were me, what question would you ask yourself? What would you like to talk about that people don't seem to bring up, other than the obvious?
Oh, you mean if I was somebody from the audience and I had someone like me? What
question would you like to be asked?
Okay, yeah. Well, I guess one important thing is who do you think did it and why? And I guess another one would be do you think there's enough evidence to get the case solved? And if not, why are you doing it?
Okay, well, let's roll that all into one. Do you think it can be solved, and who do you think did it? And if you were President Clinton, would you get involved and do something about it?
Well, okay, that's a tough one, because if I was President Clinton,
it's a tough position to be in.
Yeah, this is not a very popular issue, and there's a lot of downside to it, and not too much upside to it. So if I was him, I don't know. It'd be a judgment call. I'd probably toss a coin in the air, But I'm not him. Okay, so I can say that I would do it. All right, and do I think it can be? I don't know if you're going to get a smoking gun in this case because you'd have to break down a very important witness to get him to talk. Okay, but I think you can come pretty close to solving the case. If you can't get like who the assassins were, I think you can pretty much center on where the assassination, the places where it was planned, where it was executed, and how it succeeded. I think those questions are ultimately answerable, and I think it's important. Not so much because it'll change things, because I don't think things ever really change. I think the answer to that question will tell us a lot about what's happened to America in the last 20 to 25 years, and I think that's important to anybody.
One last follow-up on that. Do you think that in the House Select Committee, if Richard A. Sprague had carried through and not been pushed out for whatever reason, do you think he would have solved the case?
Yes. In fact, if you ask anybody in the House Select Committee who were close to Sprague, they'll tell you the same thing, and they should know.
Except for Blakey.
Well, okay, different time frame. He came after he left, so he wasn't working with them. He was probably working against them.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, that's it.
Okay.